When it comes to long-living franchises, Mega Man has got to be in the top 10, along with Mario, Metroid, Legend of Zelda, and even Donkey Kong. Of course, the ones on the NES were probably the best known for the amazing music, graphics, and even at some points the difficulty. The one I'm going to rant about in this review is what is commonly referred to as the arguably best game in the franchise. Of course, I'm talking about Mega Man 2. First off, how badass is this music? It just gets in your head and it doesn't relent. It's fast-paced, and you want to hit start to begin, but at the same time you don't because the music is just so damn good. For the most part, that's how it is in the entire game. It fits the environments perfectly. In fact, Quickman's stage is probably my absolute favorite, and ranks probably in the top 5 NES songs in my book. The music never really disappoints in this game, and that's one of the best parts of the game itself. Now, as you can see here, there's two different difficulties. The biggest difference is that the enemies take far more hits in difficult than normal. The other main thing is that you take much more damage. Other than that, there's no real change. I've played and finished the game on both difficulties, but difficult can get pretty frustrating near the end. After you pass the title screen, you can either opt to insert a password or start the game. The password is made up by a 5x5 grid in which you place blue dots in certain spots. Get the right combination and you can pick up at the last boss you fought. However, there's a catch. Once you defeat all the robot bosses and start Wily stages, the password after that will always start you at the first Wily stage, so you must play through all of those in one sitting. This usually isn't too bad unless you've never played the game before, as it's only 5 extra stages in a row, compared to the regular 8 levels. Anyway, unless you have a password, you can just hit start, and you'll be brought to the stage select screen. You have 8 choices of stages, each with varying difficulty. Me personally, I usually start off with Flashman to get him out of the way, because he's utterly pathetic. I then usually do Metal Man, then just randomly choose. Each of the 8 stages has its own theme, which you probably know already unless you've never played a Mega Man game. And if that's the case, get out of the rock you're living under. I'll go around the horn and discuss every Robot Master quick. The first one in the top left is Bubble Man. His stage is part waterfall, part underwater. You can't really swim, but when underwater you can jump extra high. Just be mindful of the spikes, as these, along with the cliffs that frequent the waterfall areas, will be a one-hit knockout. This stage is fairly easy, and Bubble Man isn't exactly difficult either. He'll swim upwards, blowing torpedo things at you and shooting bouncing bubbles. Yeah, bubbles. He's very predictable, and although it can be difficult to dodge his projectiles, he doesn't do a ton of damage and is easy to defeat. Next is Airman. I always hated this stage because of these damn heads. Their horns will rise and fall, and unless you time your jumps well, you'll take damage, and if you're unlucky enough, you'll be knocked down a pit. Other than these, the stage is simple. Airman can be extremely frustrating though. He'll fire mini tornadoes at you, which you have to somehow dodge. In my entire life, I've never gotten the timing right. You also can't fire past them, so the best way to attack it is after he fires his third set, because he'll bounce to the other side. A few good shots and he'll fall. Quickman is in the top right, and his stage is one of my favorites, because his music is just amazing. It's also potentially the hardest stage. It's pretty basic until you reach these damn pipe things. If you're not quick enough, you'll be trapped, and no matter where or how it hits you, you're dead immediately. If you completed Flashman's stage previously, you can use the power to stop them, but I don't find that as fun, and it can only be fired once in its entirety. So even if you complete the segment, you need to wait until you run out of energy before switching weapons. Quickman himself can be difficult, because he's naturally quick, and those boomerangs he throws aren't exactly easy to dodge. Next is Woodman, and his stage isn't too hard. It's obviously in a forest, and the only thing to take note of are these huge dogs that spit fire. Other than that, it's not hard, and Woodman himself is really simple. In fact, if you defeated Heatman, it only takes one fully powered shot to kill him. Crashman is in the bottom right, and his stage is just odd. His music is catchy, but you just have to keep going upwards quite a bit, avoiding these odd hamburger-like things that keep spawning from these pipes. They also spawn from the sides of the screen. The lifts are easy with the leaf shield. Crashman himself only fires when you fire, but otherwise he just hops around. Flashman is in the bottom center, and is the ice stage. You'll slide around considerably in the stage, but otherwise there's nothing out of the ordinary. His only attack is to stop time, freezing you in your tracks. He then just spams a bunch of shots at you, and if you jump prior to being frozen, he'll miss completely. Metal Man is the bottom left robot. His stage takes place in some sort of industrial zone with a ton of conveyor belts laying around. The boss himself, just like Crashman, will fire only when you do, but he occasionally switches the direction of the conveyor belt. Many people choose to play this stage first because his weapon is just absolutely amazing. It can take out multiple enemies in one shot, and many of the other bosses are weak to it. Finally, you have Heat Man. His stage is full of lava, and those damn disappearing blocks come back from the first game. I hated these in this game, the first game, and every other game that's included them. You just need to memorize the pattern. Fortunately, there is a workaround to this potentially dangerous lava river. You just use item 2. It's the equivalent of Rush Jet in later games and allows you to fly over the lava. Heat Man himself is easy. Just dodge his initial fireball throw, then just shoot him repeatedly and dodge his rushing attack. There's your quick layout of the 8 robot bosses. The only other stages are the Wily stages, which aren't anything different other than new layouts and music, although the first and second stage music is awesome. The bosses are interesting though. The first one is a dragon who spits balls of flame at you. He chases you at first and you can't hit him, but once you get to the end, the health meter will queue and you can attack him pretty freely. The second boss is a bunch of random blocks that come together and just float towards you. Number 3 is a giant gutsman in a tank. The fourth one is potentially the hardest one you will encounter. It's just a few orbs that fire a bullet at you at the same time. Until you can knock a few of them out, it's fairly difficult to avoid their attack. They are only vulnerable to the crash bomb, of which you only get about 7 shots. If you have lives to spare, you can opt to just focus on taking out the small blocks, dying, and then coming back, as death doesn't respawn those barriers. Otherwise, you can go for a more strategic approach by tactically defeating the blobs and only blowing up the necessary barriers. You can see me struggling a bit with that here. Normally, I just go for lose a life and come back strategy. The 5th Wily stage is fairly simple. It's a gauntlet of the 8 robot bosses. Each one will drop a health power up when defeated, but you still want to save as much health as possible, because you will immediately fight Wily after those 8 are defeated. Again. Wily has 2 forms, and the projectiles he fires can be frustrating to avoid. I typically use 1 or 2 energy tanks in this battle. After this, you have one more stage where you fight Wily yet again. The only weapon that you can use to defeat him, though, is Bubble Man's. So I guess if you run out of ammo for that, you may as well just lose all of your lives to continue, as there's no defeatable enemies in this stage to drop weapon ammo. Finally, let's talk about the layout of the majority of the stages. You start out with 3 lives, and you have a health bar. Most things, other than the pits or spikes, won't kill you in one hit, but instead take out a chunk of health. Naturally, if the bar empties, you're dead. In most stages, there's a checkpoint halfway through the stage and another one inside the gate that leads to the boss. If you die past the checkpoint, you start there. You cannot exit each stage unless you either lose all of your lives or actually complete the boss. You also cannot re-enter a stage once completed, but there's never a reason to actually do it. There, I just went over all the stages, so now it's time to focus on the other parts of the game. As you've probably noticed by now, the game's graphics are pretty crisp. The waterfalls look beautiful, and the lava rivers in Heat Man stage seem to be constantly moving. There's random gears placed in the background of Metal Man stage. All of the enemies have a good amount of detail to them as well, and you won't question whether they're robots or not, because they all look the part. Now, I mentioned health, ammo, and energy tanks, so let me explain those a bit. Enemies have the potential to drop one of several power-ups. You have small and large health orbs that increase your current health. They also drop small and large ammo pickups. In order to use those, you need to select the weapon first. If you just run over it with your regular pea shooter or full weapon, you get nothing out of it. They will occasionally drop extra lives as well. In addition to all of these power-ups, you can also find some energy tanks, of which you can carry 4 of them. You can use these at any time to fully restore your life bar. It can be extremely helpful in the final stages, but don't feel afraid to use them when you... Let me get on to the weapons. Each of the 8 bosses gives you at least 1 power when you finish them off. 3 of them will also give you an extra support item. These aren't exactly weapons, but instead allow you to maneuver the more difficult terrains a bit easier. Again, let's go around the horn. Bubble Man's power allows you to fire a bubble that travels along the ground. Its main use is to kill things that the regular shooter won't normally kill. Airman's shot allows you to fire 3 tornadoes in an upward path. The usefulness is pretty much easy to understand. Quickman's boomerangs aren't very ranged, but you can fire a ton of them before running out, and they can do some pretty big damage quickly. Woodman's leaf shield only comes in handy a handful of times. When you're on these lifts that go on the obvious rails, you can use it to shield yourself from these robots. Once you move, however, the shield gets thrown. Crashman's bombs can do some pretty heavy damage, but ammo is very limited. However, using these bombs can open up paths to power-ups, so sometimes it's worth the use. Flashman's ability to stop time can be helpful in the right spots, but most of the time it's more annoying than good. Metal Man's power is probably the best because it just cuts down everything with minimal effort. You get plenty of ammo for it, and most bosses are weak to it. You can also fire it in all 8 directions. All around, it's probably the best available sub-weapon. Finally, Heatman's flames are chargeable. It'll eat up ammo quicker, but can defeat even the hardest enemies with a single blast. However, it's got a slow firing rate, so it's not entirely useful unless you need it to cut down a lot in a short time, in which case, just use the metal saws. Of course, just like every Mega Man game, each robot boss has a weakness to certain weapons. You just need to experiment with it. I know I haven't really said anything bad about this game, but in reality, I can't really find anything. Again, this isn't my favorite one, but even so, this game is nearly flawless. It's got a good degree of skill, especially to first-time players. The music will get in your head and not let go. The graphics are clean and smooth. The controls are nearly perfect. In fact, the only problem I can find is that if you're on the ladder and press start to change a weapon, if you press start and not hold up, you'll fall off the ladder, potentially to your death. Overall, if I could, I'd force anyone that enjoys the NES to play this game. I don't think you'd ever regret it. Final score? 10 out of 10. This is Reaper. Happy fragging.